The Sihoo Doro S300, engineered to redefine seating comfort with its anti-gravity mechanism. I hear terms like anti-gravity thrown around a lot, but the chairs never seem to live up to these claims. What they want you to feel is that perfect suspension that only the top-of-the-line chairs like the Aeron give you. I've been disappointed so many times that you can't blame me for being skeptical, but just looking at the pictures of the S300, you could see this was a totally different animal than Sihoo's budget options. This is a chair that can compete with the contenders in the $800 range. You can discover a lot about a chair through the assembly process, so let's walk through it. Top-tier chairs like the Aeron or Leap have zero assembly, and on the other side of the spectrum, $150 chairs often require you to assemble even the base. The S300 unfortunately falls closer to the lower budget end when it comes to assembly.
Let's go.
All gloves?
Gloves?
Let's go.
The chair parts were rather loosely put into the box, but there seemed to be enough packaging to prevent any damage. Now you do in fact need to assemble the base, which is always tedious, and attaching the arms to the seat frame wasn't super easy. Thankfully, they included some spare bolts because I actually needed one because the first one I grabbed wouldn't go into the frame without cross-threading. The rest of the assembly was pretty straightforward. Setting the seat up onto a box or stool while assembling the chair makes it much easier. Now before I show my initial sit test, a quick reminder to check out our full office chair buying guide. The link is in the description. With the chair finally together, it's time to sit down in the S300. My initial impression is really good. The first thing that stood out to me was how straight up the backrest felt. This can be a major detractor for chairs when they don't sit up straight enough, so this was a pleasant surprise. The next thing that stuck out to me, and I mean literally, was the arm pad shape. The high ridge at the back of the pads was initially very uncomfortable. It bumps up high back in the elbow area. I'll dive deeper into this later because it surprisingly became one of the strengths of the chair. Before I went any further, I had to adjust the chair to fit my body. Oftentimes, this is where a chair's biggest failure points come out, especially for me at my height of 6'2". I would have liked a little more seat depth adjustment, but this is always a problem for me. The rest of the adjustments had plenty of range to fit anyone in the 80th percentile. Now, am I feeling, or rather not feeling, the effect of gravity? I'll get into that a little later. Let's run through the major aspects of the chair. I always like to start with the seat because that's where the majority of your weight is supported. Sihoo designed a shock-absorbing system with springs that compress in an attempt to relieve pressure. It's difficult to determine how your weight is being supported or absorbed when you sit down. There are many parts of the chair that contribute to this. Like any office chair, the cylinder takes a big share of the load, then the chair padding, or in this case, the suspended mesh takes its share, and finally with the S300, the shocks pick up their share. At my weight of about 200 pounds, the springs were completely compressed when seated, so I'm not sure what effect they have other than when I first sit down. The claim of dynamically adjust to changes in your seating position is definitely to be determined, as it may take more time in the chair to figure out where the support is coming from. The seat shape has a huge resemblance to the Herman Miller Aeron, with the way the hard edges are curved up at the sides and also the waterfall front edge. Sihoo also managed to design a mesh seat with no pad at the front edge, which is a rare sight across any brand. The tightness of the mesh and the seat frame design also avoid the mesh bunching up at the front, which we see in so many chairs. The S300 gets a bonus for having that adjustable seat depth, and it does a pretty good job of accommodating my long legs. The frame is wide enough to stay out of the way, but it does still limit some seating positions.
It's not terrible. If I didn't have shoes on, I'd be fine.
Now, if you follow our channel, you'll know I'm a huge fan of the Aeron. Unfortunately, the Aeron seat is my least favorite part about the chair, and it's because of that hard limiting frame. So while they did a good job of copying Herman Miller, it still ends up being a polarizing seat in terms of comfort. There's a lot to talk about with this backrest, so I'll work my way from the bottom to the top. The lower area is all about lumbar support. It features a gas lift to fine-tune how much lumbar support you'll get from the chair. A small dial on the side of the backrest releases the piston to push out the pads. I found that I was really happy with how the backrest felt and the amount of support it was giving when fully compressed. And I'm someone who likes a lot of lumbar support. It felt like the full support setting on the backrest was too much and it only pushed me too far forward in the chair. This also makes my upper back lose contact with the backrest. This isn't the first time we've seen a split back support in a chair, but I will say this is the best attempt I've seen at it. Unlike the springs under the seat, the springs behind each back pad really compress and decompress when you move around in the chair, giving you that dynamic support they're talking about. Now there's a bit of a disconnect here though, since only the lower back has flexibility and not the upper backrest. Also, if you try to move too far from the center, the frame of these pads can dig into your back a bit. But realistically, you're probably not doing that Russian twist in your office chair too often. So I wouldn't worry too much about these issues. Moving up to the upper portion of the backrest, you'll start to see a similarity with another Herman Miller chair. This time, it's the Cosm. You can especially see it in the shape of the frame and how they use the high backrest to act as a headrest. Even raised to its highest point, it still can't quite act like a headrest for me. They tout that it perfectly contours to the curve of your neck, but I'm far from being able to do that. A problem I have here is that I prefer the backrest to be lower down to hit my lumbar region, but this moves the headrest even further from my head. As you can see, when Frances hopped in the chair, she was able to use the headrest properly. She concluded,
It's kind of good.
so basically, it will depend on your height if you're able to use the backrest as a headrest. I'll start off the arm section with the biggest thing that stood out to me during that initial sit test, that bump at the back of the arm pads. When sitting away from a desk, my arms fell right down onto this ridge and it felt quite uncomfortable for my elbow. What I later realized is that when sitting at a desk, my arms were positioned far enough forward that that ridge wasn't really an issue. The real benefit of that bump is that when you enter the 6th dimension of arm adjustment, the ridge helps hold your arms from sliding back off the arm pads. And in reality, it does work to help make mobile gaming easier. The arm adjustment ranges are all quite large, honestly with even more pivot adjustment than I can imagine needing. The arm adjustments are pretty loose, especially in that arm pad pivot, but a longer sit test will help me determine if this is really a problem. The anti-gravity mechanism is Sihoo's biggest selling point on the S300. They claim that regardless of your size and weight, you can adjust the tension to suit you. For my height and weight, I found the recline tension to be just barely strong enough to allow me to recline and rest in my chosen position. I always leave the recline lock set to go freely the full range. Then I tighten up the tension so I can stop at any point mid-recline. With the tension not going quite tight enough, this means that if I push back a little too hard, I'll recline all the way back. As I do a long-term sit test in the chair, that will be one of the areas I'll really have to pay attention to. The synchro tilt mechanism does give you a great suspended feeling. It falls a bit short of the Aeron recline, which to me is the absolute pinnacle of recline. But for about half the price, this might be the best recline I've felt for under $800. The Doro S300 is a unique looking chair that really stands out from your typical office chair. I personally prefer the chrome paired with the white as opposed to the black. These are the only two options you'll get from Sihoo. The materials are right in line with what you would expect from a chair that retails for $900. The mesh is woven with an Italian velvet and DuPont DPEE. The velvet makes it softer to the touch, while the thermoplastic polymer elastomer gives it the stretch. They use the typical mix of high-end plastics and metal parts for the rest of the chair. I can never give a final verdict at the end of a first impressions video, but what I will say is that I'm looking forward to giving this chair the 60-day test. And that is not something I'll say about all the chairs we bring into the studio. So you can expect to see a more thorough review and comparisons down the road. Thanks for watching.